Hi, this is Robin, and this will be part 3 in my Comparing Photoshop and Alternatives series. In this video, I'm going to walk through a photo processing workflow to compare Photopea, which is an online photo processor, to my Photoshop benchmark. Now, my goal is to see how Photopea measures up to Photoshop for basic raw image processing, selective retouching, generative AI, and again, just simple generative AI, not tricky compositing types of things, a basic photo compositing and manipulation workflow, and sky replacement. So I will follow the same fixed workflow that I used in part 1 and 2 videos. So the first one was the Photoshop benchmark. The second was the Affinity Photo 2 comparison to the Photoshop benchmark. So I'm going to use the same image, same workflow for all these comparative products and see how they measure up. So what this is and isn't in this video, this is not a product review or a tutorial about how to use Photopea. I'm simply comparing a similar photo processing workflow, starting from raw development to pixel level manipulations, to determine whether an Adobe Photoshop alternative can handle my Photoshop benchmark steps, how well this alternative can do so, or if it can't. Okay, so depending on the types of photo processing that you do, it may be worth checking out one of these alternatives that I'm trying out to compare it to Photoshop. If you expense or write off Adobe's significantly increasing costs as a business expense, then this comparison may be unnecessary to you. For someone like me, pricing is a serious concern. So what I'm doing essentially here is sharing the research that I'm doing for myself with you to see if there is an alternative to Photoshop that will perform as Photoshop does, but be a lot less costly, or not have a subscription model. So that's sort of the point of these comparison videos. If you look in the description below this video, you'll find the links to the other videos in this comparative product series, plus, if I still have it handy, a link to the stock raw image that I use as part of the demo. At the end of each of the videos in this set on comparative capabilities, I'll share my updated comparative capabilities chart, and I use symbols to rank and rate the various alternative products to the Photoshop benchmark. I will be publishing my usual how to create different fine art looks in Photoshop workshops in between these Photoshop alternative product comparisons. So I thought I'd just break it up a little bit. Okay. All right. So let's dive into this part 3, which is a Photopea product comparison. By the way, so if you look here, you'll see this is it right here, Photopea. And to be honest, I thought it rhymed with utopia. I thought it was sort of like photo utopia or Photopea, but I discovered that the creator of this product calls it Photopea. So that's how I'm going to refer to it. So something to keep in mind with Photopea. So let's just start by looking into the interface and some of the usage considerations, and then I'll do the step-by-step walkthrough of the different workflows. Okay, so first of all, Photopea is designed to be identical or nearly identical to Photoshop in appearance. It has the same familiar toolbar down the left-hand side. It has the same panel with layers on the right-hand side, and it has the history and panels here, as well as across the top it has the options bar kinds of a setup. So I'd say, at least for me, relative to Affinity Photo, it's a lot less of a learning curve to come to Photopea than it was to try and learn a little bit about how to work with Affinity Photo. So that's something to keep in mind if you don't want to have to completely relearn a different kind of an interface. Also, Photopea is compatible with file formats that you can use in Photoshop, like PSD. However, it definitely lacks Photoshop's breadth of advanced features. So again, if you're looking for something simpler to use that isn't as complex as Photoshop, then this might be something for you to think about and kick the tires on for yourself. Now, Photopea, as you can see here in this URL, is a web-based application. You access it with a browser. There's no need to install anything. It runs in the browser, but files are processed locally. So your performance will be based on your host device's capabilities. I tend to find it a little bit slow and laggy handling very large files. And we have very fast internet here, and I have a pretty fast computer with an NVIDIA 5090 processor. So it should process pretty quickly for me, but it still lags. Okay. Images are, so if you're concerned about privacy or things like that, images are not uploaded to the internet unless you choose cloud service for saving. So you're working all entirely on your own computer, and you can save your work to your computer. But again, because it's web-based, I'd say it requires a stable internet connection. So that's just something to keep in mind. Photopea is free. So unlike the expensive ongoing subscription for Adobe Photoshop, Photopea is free, but that comes with a proviso. The free version runs continuous video ads over on the right side. So here is a snip right here in my workspace from before I paid a little bit of money. And what you would see is taken up by about 15 to 20% of your workspace on the right-hand side are constantly changing video ads in the free version. Okay, so you can pay something to a nominal fee, believe me, compared to Photoshop, a nominal fee to make them go away. So here you can see in my interface now that I've paid a little bit of money just for, trying this out. You can make those ads go away. I personally find them pretty annoying and frustrating to work with. The other thing is, let me switch to this other tab, certain tools and features. So like if you want to do, here where my highlighter is and I'm circling, the remove background feature, Photopea considers that I don't know if you can read the tiny print, a premium feature. So you can go premium for $5 a month. Okay, so if you pay that small amount of money, you don't have to watch the ads. It turns off all of these ads. You can, if you want to use the premium features, just watch an ad and then it unlocks it for you. But I tried that a few times and I said, this is not going to work for me. So I paid the $5 for a month just to sort of kick the tires on this. So anyway, you can pay that nominal fee and all these different ad things will go away on your interface. So again, something to think about. All right. Also, I believe there were different time periods. So I paid for like 30 days. I think you might have gotten a little bit of a price break if you paid for 3 months or for a year. But again, it's nowhere near the pricing for Adobe. So just something to keep in mind. So I'm going to pause this for a moment now that I've kind of given you a rough overview about what Photopea is, the fact that it's web-based, and a little bit about the impacts of, the ads. I'm going to pause this and get set up to do the 4-part workflow that I've used in the other videos. So hold on for just a moment. Okay, so now I'm going to get into the Photopea workflow and how to work with it. So to use Photopea, you would go to www.photopea.com. So you can see that up here in my browser. All right. What you would do is, unless you want to just start a whole new project, if you want to open an image from your computer like I'm going to do, you would click on this button here. I'm going to be using a raw stock image of a Japanese garden. If you open a raw image, it will open you up into the Photopea RAW. If you start with a JPEG, it will open you right into Photopea's layered workspace. Okay, so I'm going to click on Open from Computer. I'm going to choose this raw image and wait. Okay, so now we are in raw Photopea. Here up on the upper left it says it. And again, we have the typical kind of workspace with the image, the raw image in it, and we have the panels for the different raw settings over on the right. So this first stage, as I said, I'm going to do 4 stages of workflows here. So this first stage will be the basic global raw workflow. Now, what you will notice here, if you're at all familiar with Photoshop, is that this will be very, very basic raw adjustments. It's also considerably fewer than Affinity Photo 2 and much fewer than Adobe Camera Raw in Photoshop. So both of those others you can use masking. There's tons of presets and different capabilities that you can do in Adobe Camera Raw. You don't have that here. So that could be a curse or a blessing, depending on what you want. If you only want several, few basic settings just to do your conversions and don't want to have to do a lot of complex stuff, this might be a wonderful alternative, and then you don't have to spend a fortune for the Adobe and the Adobe Camera Raw. If you want to do a lot more complex or masking or things like that, kinds of capabilities in RAW, then this is not going to do it for you here. Okay, so we can see what it looks like. So just an FYI, there's a lot fewer settings here in the RAW Photopea. Okay, now the other thing to notice here is that look at this mode here over on the right-hand side. We have the original image, which is how it looked. Now, the thing that it changed is, if you saw my other videos, this image actually is, see where the hand is here? I'm just going to come straight down. So this image is actually cut off about here, and it comes straight down. So Photopea has automatically rebuilt this edge of this roof for me, which Affinity Photo 2 was completely unable to do for me. I tried multiple times to try to get it so that it would have the other side by expanding the canvas and trying to get it to manufacture that and generatively AI create it. It could not do it. And it just kept looking like it was stamping the same things over and over and over again. So to me, Photopea is already at an advantage that it immediately extended the canvas and built the equivalent type of roofline that I would have wanted to have created in this image. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing is that by default over here on the right under mode, it opens up to what they call nicer. So I'll click on that. So this is how it opens up, is in the nicer mode. And nicer is adding more vibrance and trying to take a stab at what it thinks will improve your image for you. Now, that doesn't mean you're locked into it. You still have all these adjustments, but it tries to, save you some time and do what it thinks will make your image look better for you. So I think that's really kind of cool. Okay, so now let's start working down. So I'm going to leave it on the nicer, and then I'm going to start working through these different panels. So again, just sort of like Photoshop, there's a light panel. So I'm going to come down, and I usually leave exposure and contrast to last in that category. So I'm going to start with the highlights, and I will just move these as I go. And again, this is not formula. I'm just doing things looking at the image to see what I like. So I'll do the whites next. And I'll do the same thing I do in Camera Raw. I'll just pull it a little bit and then look and then see, then I'll do the shadows. So because this has it's hazy anyway, we're not going to get rid of the haze, but the blacks were kind of lifted. So I'm going to try to push some more darkness into the blacks on this. The other thing I find happens, maybe because it's a web thing, is the numbers tend to drift a little. So even after I stop sliding, sometimes they tend to still keep adjusting the numbers sometimes. So we'll see how it goes here today. I'll just leave that there, and then I'll go back up to contrast. Typically, when I'm working in Camera Raw, I actually pull contrast to the left, but I'm going to give this a little bit more oomph here with a little bit more contrast than what Photopea assigned. Right. And just a tiny bit more exposure. I don't want it blown out. Maybe that's too much. It's blowing out the roof. Okay. All right, so that's the light panel. So then we'll come down And then color is the next category. So again, these things look very familiar to Adobe Camera Raw, at least in terms of the types of categories, the types of sliders, but there's just a lot fewer of them. Now, for these two sliders under the color panel, I'm not a fan of this approach. These numbers are sort of meaningless to me. I prefer a slider that for temperature would run from blue to yellow, so you go from cooler to warmer. That to me would be more meaningful to see where blue is, where the overlap is with warm, and where full warm is. So I'm not a fan of that, but you can still just drag it and see what happens with your image. Ditto for tint. I would prefer I see a slider that runs from green to magenta, and I can tell better than just having to guess, where to slide this. But anyway, it's certainly can be worked out. So I want this is still kind of cool here at 55. So I want to get closer into the 65 range for the Kelvin. All right, and you can click in here, and if it's just not, because again, with the mouse I'm working with, it tends to pop, or else you can slide over it and then or highlight it rather, 65. Type. Okay, so that's warmer, so that's better. All right, and then the tint, I'm going to move that up because I think this is very green, so I want to move it a little bit towards the magenta side just to tone down the green. All right, the vibrance, I'm going to add more vibrance so it gets more pop. I typically do not use saturation. Saturation mutates colors and really distorts them on a global basis, whereas vibrance just perks up colors that need some perking up. In fact, unless you go too far to the right on the vibrance sliders. In fact, typically what I do is I counterbalance. So if I pull vibrance to the right, I tend to pull saturation down just to compensate so it's not too much sat. Right, let me leave that there. And again, I'm not going to be perfectionist about this. I'm just trying to see what can be handled here relative to Photoshop and give you a sense and sort of a appetizer and see if it's something you want to look into for yourself. All right, the effects panel is next. So again, with all this foliage and different details, I do want to give it a little bump with the texture. Ditto for the clarity. Don't want to get it to the point where you're seeing white specks. That means you've overdone it and you've over sharpened. I call it snow. I want to do too much. If it gets over sharpened, it stops looking photographic. Me. I tend to like to go on round numbers, but here. All right, there we go. And then dehaze, I'll just do a little bit of dehaze. Dehaze can make things very, very dark, so very light-handed with dehaze, whether you're in Camera Raw or any of these other tools. You'll see it definitely drifts. So I find I just end up over where I want to be, so then I just use the up and down arrow keys to adjust it. Okay, so I've got the effects adjustments made, and you can see there's just not very many settings here. So curves is next. You have your choice of working with RGB curves or the individual color curves, so that's nice if you want to do that. So I will click on the dots and just move it up a little bit. And maybe I'll move this down a little. I don't want to get it too dark. Okay, just move that up just a little bit. Okay, all right, so let's say that's good enough there. I can make an adjustment. It's just a slight S-curve. I don't think this image needs noise reduction or color noise reduction, but you can see that that capability is there if you think that you want to denoise. Okay, so that's good to know. And then we come down into the color space. If you're doing a lot of web work, then sRGB at 8-bit is probably a good choice. I do very little like social media or print web posting, so I prefer to consistently work with Adobe RGB. You also even have the broader gamut for ProPhoto, and I don't work with display P3, but I believe that would be for video. So if you want to work with that, just know you have the choices, and I'm going to change it typically from 8-bit to 16-bit to work with. Okay, so once you get your settings all set as you like, then you can open. This little icon here should be a before and after. Yeah. So here's how it looked originally, except for the fact that it did expand the canvas and the building on the left and built the chopped off piece that was there. So I think that's great personally. So here's before and there's after. Okay, so I feel that's good enough. Let's say click on open to move into the layered workspace. So this is like going from Adobe Camera Raw to the Photoshop layers. Okay, so now we're into the moral equivalent of the Photoshop interface here. So now I'm going to move into stage 2 of the workflow. So that was stage 1, which was the raw processing. So now stage 2, I'm going to be doing the same workflow I did in the other 2 videos in terms of working on selective retouching and generative filling selected areas of the image. So just a quick overview. We're not teaching about how to use this interface. It looks, I mean, what I loved about this, as I said, is it looked so much like Photoshop that it was just very easy to adapt to working with this Photopea. So we've got the toolbar down the left, we've got the options bar across the top, we've got these panels over on the right with the layers panel, the channels, the history. You can go to window just like in Photoshop and, click on whichever other ones you want to have open, so that's nice. All these different menus parallel what you see in Photoshop, so to me, I find it very friendly to try to learn it relative to Affinity, which had its own personas and different approaches, even though there was some similarity to Photoshop. Okay, so let's do the same thing I would do in Photoshop, which is duplicate and work on a copy of the background layer. You should be able to either right-click and duplicate the layer there, or do a Control or Command J. There we go. Unlike Photoshop, it doesn't label it as a copy, but I think we can, double-click and label it. Okay, so those two are the same. It's just work on the copy. All right, so now what I want to do to start here, as I said, this is the selective retouching and generative filling, is I want to try to clean up some of this distraction that's down here in the left foreground. There's pipes going under the water. There's other things. I don't know what this is. Maybe it's a wall or something, but I want to see how well Photopea will deal with getting rid of some of that. So let me zoom in here a little bit to see a little better. Okay. And what I'm going to work with to try to get rid of this is I think I'll start with a spot healing tool, which again, it's a similar tool to Photoshop, just for some of these things. So over here in the left toolbar, where is it? Here we go, the spot healing brush. It sort of looks like a Band-Aid with a little sparkle next to it. So I'll click on that. I like that it's got this blue stripe here to show you which tool you're working with. It's a little more subtle in Photoshop. You just have to know that there's black behind the tool, so I kind of like that. All right, so now let's see. The green, if you see where my highlighter is here, over here it's in the water, is where my highlighter is, just to help you see it. That little tiny dot in the center is that spot healing tool. So I'm going to use the right bracket key, just like in Photoshop, to make it a little larger, and I'll try to make it a little bit bigger than the thing I want to remove. So then I will just drag along, and hopefully Photopea will get rid of that pipe under the water. Wait, there we go. Okay, that did good. And then I will do the same thing with this one over here. Right, and let me get rid of, I think this is rocks built up here, but it's white and it's drawing attention. So I'm not trying to build a gorgeous image here. I'm just trying to look at capabilities. So, all right, so that is good. Let me try this. And just like Affinity, this tool does not auto fill in. If you do a perimeter around an object, you have to fill it in and paint over it completely. So let me try this again over on this. So realistically, this column might reflect in the water, but I'm just trying to see how it works to get rid of things here. All right, let's see if it fills in this gap in the water. Yeah, okay, so that's good. All right, so now this is a lot more complex. I don't know if you can see all this stuff, this debris, I'll call it, under the water. So I'm going to use a different tool for that. So I'm going to come back over here to the left toolbar, and I think I'm going to try to work with the patch tool, which again, it's a familiar tool from Photoshop. And I'm just going to only at a little at a time, because otherwise you have no place to drag it. So you draw with it like a little lasso around the area that you want to replace, and then you drag in the direction of an area you want to become the patch. So I'll just click inside and drag, release, okay? And I'll just keep repeating this process. And I'm only doing a little at a time because there's only a little real estate to use as fill. And you can see what's happening, so I don't need to narrate here. And you can see it's copying, I assume these are fish, these fish over again, but we'll deal with them in a moment. I try to look for, I drag it around a little bit, because what I do is I look for areas that look like it would match the tones in the area I am trying to repair. If something doesn't get picked up the first time, I just do it again. Okay, let's see if this will work over here. I'll go a little bit outside. Just drag it along. Yeah, that's good. Great, and let me go back to the spot healing brush again and see how big. Yeah, that's a good size. So now I'm just going to be left clicking with a mouse over. I position the brush or the circle, which is hard to see with the black against the green, over each of the things I want to remove, and then I just left click. So this is working very similar to the spot healing brush in Photoshop. The thing I miss here in Photopea, and I missed it in Affinity too, is an equivalent to the remove tool, because the remove tool can make some really nice clean edges if something smears a little, like it's prone to do with either the spot healing brush or the healing brush tool. So I'm just sort of getting rid of some of these different fish just because they're little white specks or anything that pulls attention. Let me pull over here. And you can, at least for my system, see the response time it takes to do this. Okay, so I will leave that. Oh, and there's back here in this walkway, it looks like there's a sign, so I'll take that out. So you can see it's doing a pretty good job of matching and filling, and it's not too slow to work with. So I'm pretty pleased with how that is working. So let me just label this. I'll call this the smalls. How's that for the cleanups of small things? And I use the patch and spot healing. Okay. Great, so I'll do a stamp layer rather than just copying this. So again, the stamp layer, if you're not familiar from my other videos, you simultaneously press and hold Shift, Control or Command, Alt or Option, and E. And that gives you like a merge of these prior layers. It gives you like it's a good term here. It gives you the equivalent of a new background layer to start with. It's a clean layer. So I'm going to do a larger remove and we'll see how it works here. Let's see how Photopea does with that. Okay, so now I'm going to try to, the next thing I want to try to do here in terms of the removing and retouching is get rid of this large rock and its shadow. So since I want to be able to try compositing, I want to see if, it did fine with these little things. Let's see how it does with something bigger. And then I can composite something else into that space if it works. All right, so when I did this same workflow in Photoshop, the Photoshop remove tool was perfect. I mean, I just traced around the perimeter, it filled it all in, it completely removed it and seamlessly matched it to the surroundings. The Affinity in painting did a good job too, but it required me to color it all in order for it to work. So let's see in Photopea here how we're going to work with this. So let me try to grab the lasso tool. Okay, you can see it's highlighted over there. And I'm going to just start tracing a little bit outside the item or object I want to replace to tell the interface what it should use as reference for filling. All right, so, and again, so this is something that's a little different than Photoshop and Affinity also is you do see the dashed line selection when you make selections here in Photopea, but in Photoshop and Affinity Photo, we typically refer to them as marching ants because it's animated and it looks like the little things are marching around. This is just static dashed lines, but you can still see that you have a selection around the rock and the shadow. So now I am going to come back over it because again, you have nested tools under these little arrows. So I'm going to right click here and I'm going to come down to what Photopea calls Magic Replace. And it looks like a lasso with a sparkle. And I'm going to see if that can remove this by click. So up on the options bar across the top, I'm going to click on remove and see what happens here. It's processing. We'll see what happens. Okay, that doesn't look bad. So I click over here to, yeah, so that actually didn't do too bad of a job. So, but it does need some cleanup. So it definitely didn't do as well as Photoshop. May not have done as well as Affinity either, but it's not bad. So I'm going to again go back to my spot healing brush in that same nest of tools. And then I will make the brush a little bigger with the right bracket key. And there's some blur, so I'm going to go beyond the blur. Clean this up. Oh, and yeah, with smart objects, you do have to rasterize them in Photopea, so I'll just click OK. I don't know why it's creating the smart object, but I'm not going to argue with it. All right, let's see if we can undo that. So I'm going to do another stamp layer because it probably needs some content to work on. All right, let's try that with the cleanup. There we go. Okay, that's better. All right, so now we have the rock and the shadow removed. While I'm over here, I'm going to get rid of some of that over there too. Okay. All right, so that's good. So this was, just relabel it, remove large rock. So that was with the lasso tool and the magic replace. So that did a not bad job. Okay, so now because we have a transparent layer, I'm going to do another stamp layer with the Shift, Control, or Command, Alt, or Option, and E. Okay, so we have a content layer again to work with. So now the next thing I'm going to do again to mirror the workflow that I used in the other videos is I want to do a generative expand function. And again, because in the other two tools in Photoshop and Affinity, I was trying to build out so that I could create this edge of this building that was not in the original raw. So this sort of saved me the time. But I'll do it anyway, just so we see how it works with the foliage, etc. here. So I'm going to work with the crop tool, which I think is under the eyedropper here in Photopea. Yeah, here we go. So left click on that. And if you look across the options bar, just so you can see other functions that are here, it will let you straighten, it will let you delete crop pixels, which I never do in Photoshop either. And then there's a content aware. So we'll see how this works. And when you're in crop, you do get these handles so you can drag on them. So I'm going to drag it out just a little bit left. I don't need to drag it out as far as I had in those others. And then I'll drag it down a little bit too, because as I said, I want to composite something else into this area and I just want to see how it handles matching. This is complicated to match. This is simple. So let's see how it handles it. I'm going to try the content aware and see how it deals with this. So I'm just going to click on that box, and then you can click the check mark. I'm assuming you can click on carriage return also. Wait, see what it does. Okay, I'm going to pause for just a minute and see if everything, did I end up with a lock layer? Hold on just a minute. Okay, so it figures as soon as I put it in pause, then it fills in. All right, so let's accept this, get off of the crop. I don't know why it's doing that box, but anyway, so you can see that it filled in and it did a much nicer job than if you look at the Affinity Photo video. What it was doing was taking slices and replicating the same tree over and over and over again. This followed the line. It made a nice shape to the rocks, and this of course was simpler, but at least it replicated. Look at the little indentations here in the shadows. So I think Photopea did a much nicer job on the canvas expansion than Affinity Photo did. And I think Controller Command D will get rid of that. And I don't know what this box is that has appeared here, but we hopefully can get rid of it. Okay, so that did a nice job on expanding the canvas, more so in Photopea than in Affinity Photo. And of course, it was a lot easier and simpler and straightforward in Photoshop. It's all pretty much semi-automated. All right, so let me add another stamp layer over on the panel here. So I don't know why it is using this box here, because I'm not familiar with seeing that. Hold on just a moment again. Let me see if I can figure out why it's doing. Okay, so got it to time out with the processing. It didn't want you to have to sit and watch it. So we have successfully here now for the stage 2 done the retouching to clean up the distractions and the noise here. We're able to remove the large rock and its shadow that were over in this area, and then using the crop tool to expand the canvas coupled with the content aware fill from the options bar, get Photopea to fill in some of the foliage very nicely, much better than Affinity did, as well as the water to expand the canvas that way. So now we're at the end of that stage 2 workflow, which was the retouch and generative fill. So now I'm ready to move on to stage 3, which is to composite something into this scene and then color match it. So I want to replace the rock that was in this scene with a Japanese stone lantern. And then because the stock image that I'm using was from a completely different scene and it's very cool and blue, I want to try to harmonize the color of that lantern to this much more green and warm scene. So first thing I want to do is, you have two different options. You can either do a file open for the image if you want to composite something into a scene, or if you want it to come right into the layers, I mean, if you did that, then you could remove the background and use a move tool and move it in. If you want the image that you want to work with just brought right into the layers stack, then you would do a file open and place, which I believe is similar to Affinity Photo also. So I'm going to try that. So file menu up at the upper left, open and place, click. And I'm going to use this image right here, and open. Okay, so you can see it's a different resolution and size, but you can just see here too how blue this image is relative to the scene that I want to put it in. And all that I want to work with is this lantern. I want to put it down in that space where the image was. So I'm going to first of all just kind of drag this down to this area here where I want it. And then you can see if you look over here in the layers stack that it was an Adobe stock with the Japanese lantern, and it has automatically made it into a smart object. That's what that symbol is there, just like in Photoshop you'd see the smart object symbol. And with the smart object, that means we can scale it without losing resolution of the image. So I want to try to scale this to suit the background a little better. Let's just see, I might scale it back down again, but just to try it. Edit, transform, scale. Okay, we've got the handles, so we can pull it up. If we want to make it a little bigger, we can pull this over. Okay, I think that's, maybe that's a little bit big. Maybe make it a little bit more squat. Okay, all right, and then once we get that, we can click check or carriage return to get the size. So we were able to transform it and scale it just very similarly to the way we would work with it in Photoshop. And then I want to try to get this so that it's extracted from its background. So let's see, select, remove background, processing. Let's see how it does that. There we go. So that did, again, this did a much nicer job than in Affinity Photo. It was so hard to select the thing and get the little opening and whatever. So this was considerably better than Affinity Photo in the way that this operated with extracting this lantern, stone lantern from its background. I'm really pretty pleased with that. Okay, so now I'm going to maybe use the move tool and just move this over a little bit this way. Okay, so we can, so these things do function like in Photoshop. That's great. So now in Photopea, there is no harmonize function like there is in Photoshop. So I'm going to have to manually color match just like we did with Affinity Photo too. There was no harmonize there either. So the way I'm going to do that is first I want to get on a content layer. So I'll click on this layer to make it active because we've just got the selection there. And I want to look for, where did my eyedropper tool go? Where's the eyedropper? Okay, and I'm going to sample just a color that's over in the area nearby to this to use to color match. Okay, and so I just left clicked once, and you can see over on the left in the toolbar, it put that color as the foreground color, so that is good. So now I'm going to come back up to that lantern layer, and when it did the extraction, let me just show you here. You can see the mask, so it created a mask for just the lantern. So now with that layer, I want to Control or Command and click on that mask so that we get the selection active again. And what I want to do is add a color fill layer that will use this color we just selected on that lantern. So bottom of the layers panel, again, it's just like in Photoshop, there's adjustment layers. Look, it looks very familiar. And I'm going to click on color fill and hopefully, yep, it's going to use that color. So click OK. And there we go. So that filled that in, which is great, except obviously we don't want it like that because it's opaque. But if we come to the blend modes, like we have in Photoshop, click on the down arrow. Again, it works the same way. Just pull down to see. You would use the color blend mode to apply the color and see the details in the object that you want to. There we go. So now it's adhered that green and you see the lantern again, but that's just a little bit too green and crazy. So then you can do just what you do in Photoshop and come across to opacity and lower the opacity to taste. And you might want it different than I do, but you do you. But the point is you can make the adjustment. And I'm just looking for a hint of the green versus it screaming green. All right, let me leave it at the 40%. That's pretty good. Okay, so we were able to composite that in, remove the background so that that's into the scene, and color match it to the scene. So I feel pretty good about that. So let me do another stamp layer. So we're not working. On the color fill layer. All right, so now we've got a new stamp layer here. Let me just label it. All right, so that is the end of stage 3, which was the compositing and color matching. So now we will move on to the last workflow category, stage 4, which is sky replacement and sky reflection in the water. Okay, so any reflective surface you probably would want to match your sky. For some of these, if you don't do any compositing, if you don't do any sky replacements, then these workflows might not be of interest to you. But again, selfishly, I do those things. So I'm looking to see which other products can handle those for me and if there is an alternative to Photoshop. So if you're interested in potentially doing sky replacements, then this might be interesting to you. Okay, so now again, here in Photopea, as the same as Affinity Photo 2, there is no sky replacement interface like there is in Photoshop. It is a manual process, both here in Photopea and in Affinity Photo. So what I'm going to do is start with by selecting the sky where I want to put the reflection, the new sky that I'm going to use. So I would go up to select color range for this. So because there's all these complicated trees and leaves and branches and openings, I don't think using a quick selection tool or something like that is going to work very effectively. So I want to go up to select menu and look for color range. And again, these are all similar things to what there is in Photoshop. Click on that and we get the color range dialog box. So now what I want to use is, because this is bright, instead of sampling colors, so let's say you want to replace the greens, well then you might leave it on sampled colors and click there. But I want to get the sky and ultimately the reflection area, so I'm going to click on that arrow and I'm going to choose highlights and watch what happens here when that happens. There we go. So it's doing a lot of the work for you by selecting the bright areas that you'll need to replace. Granted, it's selecting other areas too. You can adjust the fuzziness or the threshold just like in Photoshop. So fuzziness, if you're not familiar with it, means how wide a brightness in this case or a color range is included in the mask, okay, or in the selection. If you go lower, it is more precise. If you go wider, you'll get more of it. So look, there's more highlight being picked up, less highlight being picked up. So I'm going to, I think, just leave mine at 0% for this particular image because I want to get as much of this leaf detail as I possibly can. So I'm going to say that's good for me. So I'm going to click OK and wait. All right, so I don't know how well you can see it, but there's all those little dashed lines there for a selection. So what I want to do is capture them as a mask on this layer. So again, just like Photoshop, bottom of the layers panel, square with the circle is add layer mask. And this one says add raster mask. Okay, so you can see this layer mask looks just like what we had there in that select color range. Now, what you have to do here with something like this is, because there's obviously a lot more areas than we want to have the sky, you can doctor the mask. So you'd have to be sure you're working on the mask. If you look in the right where my highlighter is, just be sure the frame is around it. And then what I want to do is grab the brush tool on the left side from the toolbar. Okay. I want to be sure I'm working, yeah, so it's not, so I'm going to hit the D for the default, and then I'm going to hit the X key, or else you can use that little two-headed arrow to make sure that black is the foreground color. And then let's just look, yeah, so look at how tiny. So inside my green highlighter, showing you where I am, is the size of the brush, and that's microscopic, and we have a big area. So I can use the right bracket key to make the brush bigger, just so we can paint faster in here. And I just want to be sure I am working. Yeah, so this is a hard brush. Good. Okay. So I'm just going to start brushing in here and painting away all the white in this area that is not sky. And again, because there is, at least on my system, a little bit of lag, I don't go too close to the edges of things that I want to keep, because it could, and then I'm going to make that brush a little smaller as I get up closer to areas that I don't want impacted. Getting rid of that other structure. It's in the back of the Japanese garden. Okay. There's light shining through the trees here, so I don't want to do away with that. I'm going to make this bigger because obviously with this gazebo or whatever, I'm actually going to get rid of some of this. I don't want the sky going through there. All right, I'm not going to go right out to the edge. Just painting over it with the black hard brush tool. And if I go over, I'm not going to worry about it too much, because again, I'm not trying to be too perfectionist here. All right, so now what I want to do is, because I am getting close to the edges, click there, rather than try to paint with a mouse, which is not a good thing, I'm going to click as close as I can to the edge. And you might want to switch to a more square brush if you have something like this, but I'm not going to take the time now. I'm just going to click once and then go a little further down, reposition, hold the Shift key, and click again, and it draws a straight line just like it would in Photoshop. So click, Shift, click. And again, you would spend more time for yours than I'm doing for this. Do the same thing over here. Click, reposition, Shift and click. Click, position, Shift, click. And because this is curved, that's why I'm doing it in small increments, to just sort of find quasi-straight lines. Okay, so let's just say that that's good enough. There might be a little bit of the top of the structure here that might be blocked out. Okay, so let's just say that that is the doctored mask over here in the right-hand layers panel. I'll hit Alter Option and go back to the full view again. All right, so now we have the mask that we can work with to use to create a sky. All right, so now I want to open up a sky image. So again, there's no library of skies in here. There's no automatic masking like it gets done in Photoshop. This is all manual. So we would go to the File, Open in Place again. So File, upper left here at the interface, Open in Place. And again, I'm going to use this cloudy sky since it sort of matches this scene. I wouldn't put a bright sunset or something like that here. Let it load. Okay, so again, it's put it on the right-hand layer here. So this is cloudy sky that I've imported. Okay, and you can see it's so tiny here. So again, you can move this, oops, okay, move this up. All right. And I want to, since I want to resize this, I want to convert this to a smart object. So over on the right-hand side on that layer, I'll right-click and convert to a smart object. Okay, it put the smart object symbol there. So this is all functioning just as it would in Photoshop. So now I want to scale this. So edit, transform, scale. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to pull it across the whole image. I don't see any reason to. I just want to pull it down low enough to hit the areas where there's sky showing through. Okay, that should work. And for yours, if you need to see where to place it, you could always temporarily lower the opacity for that sky and just to see from behind where you're putting it and then put it back to 100%. I'll pull these out to cover to the edges. Okay, and then I'll click the check mark up at the top to accept that. All right, so now what I want to do is copy this sky mask to this layer here. So to copy, so you don't have to start all over again, you'd press Alt or Option, which is the same thing you do in Photoshop, left click on that mask and just drag it up to the layer you want and release. There we go. That's not bad. A little bit of funkiness on the edges, but if you were going to be spending the time, you could doctor that a little bit more. I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time, but so it's only being applied to the area that we had previously selected. And see, it's done it behind the trees and everything. So this is pretty nice. Okay, so something that you could try if you want to experiment with it is once you get that there, then maybe you want to apply a blend mode or something. I don't know, like a multiply, say it makes it darker. So that's sort of interesting. And then maybe reduce the opacity so it's not too much. Just to let you know, you can play with it in the same way as you can with Photoshop. Okay, so that's not bad. Yeah, so that's pretty good there. Now, one thing, so this seemed to get a little bit lighter maybe from adding that in there. So let's see if I go back to this stamp layer and click on that to make that active again. Let's see what happens if I add a levels layer below that sky layer. So bottom of the layers panel, let's choose a levels adjustment layer. Okay, we get the level here, and maybe I'll see if I'll watch this foliage and see if anything happens. Yeah, that's a little better, right? I don't want to do too much. Right, so I'll just leave that like that. So I'm just adjusting the histogram from black to the midtones to the whites, all right? And that's there. So that's pretty good. So now what I want to do is I don't need it applied everywhere because it might be a little bit, and see, so with that white mask, that level is being applied to the whole thing, which is making it a little harsh. So I can throw this mask away with Alt or Option, left click and drag it to the trash can icon, just like in Photoshop. And then what I want to do is add an all black mask. So I want to basically hide this adjustment and then just paint it in selectively. So if I press and hold Alt or Option and click on the Add Layer Mask, just like we would in Photoshop, you get the black mask, so it's hidden those levels. So now, working on the mask, we can get the brush tool from the toolbar. Be sure it's on white, so I need to down here use the X key or click on that two-headed arrow to make sure white is the foreground color to paint on the black mask and reveal where we did those levels. And then again here we want a soft brush, not a hard brush. So see, hardness means to the right, softness is to the left, so that's good. And then I don't want to paint with it at full strength. So I want to lower the opacity maybe to about 50%. Let's see how it goes. You could always increase it. All right, let's say 51. That's good enough. And then flow, I think I'll do a low flow also. So by the way, these little arrows, so if you want to click and work with the slider, you can do that, or just left click on the words and drag. So that works just like Photoshop too. Around 15% maybe. All right, let's try that. And I'm on the brush, and let's see. Oh yeah, the brush is tiny again, so let me get that to a little bit bigger size there. Not huge. So I'm just going to start painting over these trees and this foliage that I wanted to make a little darker, and hopefully it'll paint white before I do that. And just capture a little bit more darkness. It's a little darker here. Right bracket, make it a little bigger. Yeah, and you can see there's some edges here, but I'm not going to, for purposes, I mean, the point of this was to see, as I said, what can be done in Photopea, so versus trying to create a perfect image. So let's see if we increase the opacity a little bit or increase the flow a little bit. All right, let's say that that is good enough just to get a sense of it. So let me show you the mask over here where we were working. So you can see I've revealed it just subtly along the tree line there. So that's good. I feel good about that. All right, so I'm going to come back up to the cloudy sky layer where we added the sky in again. All right, so I think we're doing okay here. So now we want to add another stamp layer because we're finished with adding the cloudy sky. All right, so this is going to start working on the reflection in the water. Okay, so now we want to do pretty much the same kind of thing again. So with that layer highlighted here, we want to repeat the process that we did for the sky. So we want to go up to the select color range, again with the highlights. So we have it highlighted in the reflection area too. I don't need to adjust the fuzziness, so I can just click OK. All right, we've got our, I don't know if you can see it, but the dashed lines are there. So again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm able to add a layer mask to that layer, which is good. So far, so good. We'll see if it keeps going here. And then again, I want to reveal that layer mask with the alter option. Click on the layer mask, and we're going to doctor this mask with the frame around it. So again, I want to use a hard brush. That's the soft. I think this is the hard. Yeah. Hard. Good. Right. And we want it full opacity, full flow. Right. So now this time we want to keep the white area down here for the reflection revealed. So again, I think I can make the brush bigger with the right bracket key to paint. Oops, we're on the wrong thing here. The black, paint with black. Because we want to hide all the rest of this and only put the sky in the reflection this time. And make the brush smaller as we get closer to the edges here. Okay, and let me make this a little bigger. I don't want the reflection on the stone lantern. And again, I'm not worrying if I go over edges. Just for demos, we're just trying to see how this process works. Okay, so let's say that that is good enough. All right, so we are at our mask. All right, so now we want to do the same thing in terms of, let me go back to my neutral tool so we don't paint on anything here. We want to do the same thing that we did before in terms of opening the sky. You want to use the same sky because that's got to reflect down. So we'll do File, Open in Place, same sky, Open. All right, there it is. So, and then we can click Accept. And then what we want to do with that is this time you don't have it the same direction, so we want to flip it vertically. So let's see, Edit, Transform, Flip Vertically. So this is again very much like Photoshop. And then move it down this time. And again, it's already a smart object, so that's good. So this is going to be the vertical flip sky. Okay, so we want to resize it, but you want to be sure it's on the smart object so it doesn't lose its resolution. So Edit, Transform, Scale. And again, I'm not going to stretch it over the whole thing. I just want it over the area where reflection needs to be. And again, if you want, you can lower the opacity to see, where you line it up and then just put it back up again. All right, so that looks pretty good to me. So now what I have to do is copy this mask. Oh, it looks like I might have missed a spot. Let's just see here. No. All right, looked like there was some white there. Copy this mask to this layer. So again, Alt or Option, click on that mask, drag it up so you copy it to the new layer. And there we go. It has put it into the reflection area for you. And again, if it's too light or too dark, or you can affect the blend mode here. Let's see what happens if we do a darken on that. And maybe I'll lower the opacity because this looks like a little bit much here. Okay. And again, you would spend more time playing with it. And I did. Oh, too much. Put this back to normal. This one back to 100%. All right, and you can decide maybe it's just better on normal here. Yeah, because it was picking up the green from below. All right, but I lowered the opacity a little bit so it's not quite as dark. Now, another thing that you can do is, let me just look at this for a moment here and see, yeah. So see, this has pretty harsh edges and sharp edges. So if you want to soften the transition, a way to do it is with the mask active, go up to Filter, Blur. I'd use Gaussian blur for something like this. And then then the more to the right you do it, the more blurred it will be. More to the left, the more hard it will be. Okay, so I'll just soften it up a little bit and click OK. And Alt or Option, click on the mask. So yeah, so that just softened up the transition and didn't make it quite so harsh. And this is still a little bit intense, but you would play with yours. The point is, you can manually create the sky and the reflection in Photopea, just like you could in Affinity Photo, but it's not an automated interface, just like in Photoshop. So this was the end of the 4 different stages of workflow. So let me scroll down here. Oops. And see, oh, I had deleted some layers at the beginning. So, all right, I was going to show you before and after, but I guess we can't do that since I had made some transparent layers. So anyway, we've ended up now going from that original image. We have removed the large rock that was in the foreground. We got rid of all the distracting garbage that was under the water and the pipes and all the things that we didn't want to see there. We were able to change the sky and add a reflection. We were able to do some spot touch-ups around. We were able to, in RAW, make it from a cooler to a warmer scene. So I feel pretty good about Photopea, generally speaking. And if you don't need a lot of the complexity of Photoshop, this is something really worth looking into, I think. And the fact that it just looks and functions so much like Photoshop makes it a really easy learning curve on it. So I'm going to stop with the workflow here. We've completed that, but hold on just for a moment, and I'm going to pause and open up my capabilities comparison chart with symbols that I'm using to compare how each of these products that are alternatives to Photoshop work compared to the benchmark. So hold on just a moment. Okay, so here is my editing capabilities matrix or comparison chart that I told you about. So at the end of each of the videos in this series on Photoshop and alternative products, I'm going to show this chart filled in with my various ranking symbols that I've been using. So just so you know what my symbols mean. So the green check mark means that the application handles the capability, handles it well, is comprehensive, and is quasi-automated. The amber symbol means that the capability is either partially supported or it is handled more manually than in Photoshop. Okay, so all of these are being compared to Photoshop as the benchmark, and you can decide for yourself if you want to compare them versus each other. Okay, so I said it's not really in-depth review. And then so far, luckily, there haven't been any red X's, so I have a red X symbol too. And if this particular capability to do any of these features does not exist or is not supported, then I'll put an X in the box. But so far, that has not been the case. So since we went through Photopea, and there are other videos, separate videos on each of these other two that I'll include links to, you can check them out if you are interested. But for Photopea, I would say that if you need a very simple raw processing, very straightforward, no masking, no presets, no, a lot of different sort of quasi-layered manipulations with masks, then Photopea would probably be a very good solution for you, given that it's either free if you can put up with the ads, or it's only like $5 a month. Okay, so, and again, it's not a subscription because it's on the web. It's just you're paying to get rid of the ads. Okay. So if you need that very simple raw processing, Photopea would be great. It's almost a Photoshop lookalike, very similar user interface. So that to me is a really big plus. If you want only limited generative AI, you're not a big, generative AI person, then, certainly the tools that were in Photopea would be, you could use them very easily, very capably. They're just not as comprehensive. So this doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's not as comprehensive or it's not as automated. So you can do all these same functionality in Photopea that you can do in Photoshop, just with maybe a little bit more work. Okay. The big benefit is that it is web-based. You can use it free or very low cost. There is no subscription to Photopea. So I said the ads, are an issue. It's very Photoshop-like, so that would be an easy transition for you to get. So to make from Photoshop to being able to work with Photopea, I think. Because Photopea is web-based, then the response times, for working with the tools or the processing will depend on your network and your system. So that's just something you need to keep in mind. And I'd say try it out and kick the tires, if you're thinking about possibly leaving Photoshop and moving on to something else. So the final thing I want to point out is I am not sponsored by any of these companies. I'm just a user trying to determine whether to stick with Photoshop or whether to consider alternative options that might be out there, given the fact that Adobe is significantly changing and increasing its pricing and changing the scope of the plans. So I just wanted to see what my options are. I'm sharing my test results with you so that if there's something of interest to you, then I'd say definitely kick the tires yourself according to the ways that you process photos and what your workflow is. You may not do all the different 4 workflows that I did, so try it out and see if it works from the way that you process photos. As I said up front, I'm alternating these comparative product workflow videos with my more usual Photoshop how-to workshops on my PhotoMaker Academy channel until I complete this comparison chart. So hope this gives you at least a sense of some of the things to look into if you're interested, and take care.